All right, Evan. Thanks for doing this interview. You and I have spoken about the Atavist before. I've pegged you at least one bar and interrogated you, but I thought that maybe I would do this in a video version because at Download the Universe, I think really that the titles that have really kind of doing what we think ebooks could really do tend to be coming from the Atavist. So I would just want to hear the story from you about how you went from being a journalist like me and a lot of the other people at Download the Universe to being a journalist slash publisher. So where'd the idea come from?
At least I get to keep slash. Sometimes it feels like I've abandoned the first the first part. So it came from. I mean, it kind of came out of, I think, a little bit out of frustration. Like a little bit, it was driven out of frustration because if you are a freelance journalist, as I was for 10 years, and you are pitching stories, and a lot of that is rejection, which you kind of comes with the territory, but it comes to feel like you're sort of competing against all these other writers for just a tiny and possibly declining number of slots for a certain type of work. And so I always wanted to do work that was a certain length and do pieces that were like the pieces that I love to read. And I subscribed to the New Yorker and Harper's and Discover and all these magazines. And then, over the years, like I got to do some of that, but then, it just seemed like, well, why aren't there more of these outlets? So that was sort of what got me thinking about it, was actually just frustration. But then what really made it happen was that Nick Thompson, who was at the time my editor at Wired, he is more of an action person than me. I'm more of a complainer. And so I complained about it, and he said, why don't we do something about it? Why don't we start a magazine or an outlet or something? Mm-hmm. And he brought in our third founder, Jefferson, who actually knew how to code things. So it's sort of like once the three of us got together, then it was more, what could we do? It was just a side project, just a kind of experiment. What could we come up with? And I had also had this experience where I had done this story for Wired, where I tried to disappear for a month, and it had been, the story that I had written that had gotten the most attention of anything that I had done. But there were two interesting things about it. One was that I did a ton of media for it. Like I was on TV, I was on the radio talking about it, and I kind of had this thought like, well, if I got a royalty for every copy they sold mm-hmm. of the issue with this story in it, I would have done better than I did with my fee. And the other one was I had shot all this video, and granted, like a lot of the video is probably pretty dumb. It was sort of like reality style confessional that I did while I was on the road, and I was like trying to escape from all these people, and they didn't do anything with it. There sort of wasn't anything to be done with it. I thought, man, I feel like this could have been a central part of the story, and maybe there are stories that you can do that really are multimedia in a certain way. And so once we started playing with ideas, then we built a prototype, and then it's sort of just a project like this like takes on momentum where you want to see it through and see what happens. So we thought, well, now we'll assign stories to people. Now we'll do this, and then suddenly we were launching, and it was almost like it just kind of went from there. And it wasn't like we sat down and said like, let's start a business and our business will be selling stories. It was just more, here's a fun thing to do, and then all of a sudden, well, here we are. Like take one step to the other, and suddenly we're producing stories.
Well, I mean, you have set up a very distinctive way of bringing in all those other elements, like you mentioned the video. You use video and sound and letters and all these different things, and it's very unobtrusive, but also very powerful, which is a tricky combination. So did you guys basically have an idea in mind from the start of how to make that side of it work, or was there a lot of fiddling around to try to find a solution?
There was a lot of fiddling, and we actually still do a lot of fiddling in different ways. I mean, we have two producers, Olivia Koski and Gray Beltran, who like it's their job to try to figure out like how stories can incorporate this sort of thing and how we can do things differently and what makes something powerful and what seems like it's just something you threw in for the sake of throwing it in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the beginning we had these two principles, and one of them was, well, if you're going to do something like video, then we should do it in a way that propels the narrative. And we knew we were going to do narrative stories, so not do something where it's sort of here's an interview with the author that sort of stands off to the side. Here's something that feels extraneous. Like if you're going to do it, put it in there and really try to build a story that incorporates it. So that was one principle. And then the second principle was we did also want to take advantage of being able to pull in documents and even audio clips and things that would be sort of unobtrusive. But the principle there was the reader gets to decide. So the reader can turn it all off. So either it's part of the story or the reader can make it disappear. So if we have things like maps and timelines and characters, and some people look at them, some people don't. Some people love them, and some people think that they're extraneous. But the driving principle is you never have to look at that if you don't want to. If you want to turn on a layer, you can. And so those were kind of the guiding principles. And then from there, it's more, what does this story call for? Is it possible? We've done some that have almost no real multimedia in them because we just couldn't find the hook that made it better. So, and sometimes maybe it hasn't worked,
But not finding that stuff isn't a reason for you to not do a story.
No. I think for us, it's sort of the story first, and then the multimedia is still, it's not the driving principle. Now we have our pieces that when people pitch them, they come with a heavy multimedia component that we say, let's do this because it has that. Still, the narrative has to be there. But there's some stories that, I think our idea is not that every story can be told in a multimedia fashion. It's that there's a different way to approach these pieces, and if we try to do each one the same every time, then most of them will not work. So we're okay if something doesn't have any video in it. I don't mind that. The only place it comes in is that we charge more for the multimedia version for a variety of reasons, some of which are business and some of which are the production that goes into them and what we think they're worth. But they always come with an audiobook. So we feel like it sort of justifies the price because audiobooks are quite expensive to have an entire audiobook included and all of those maps and other things which are usually there. So whether or not it has a chapter that's a video, we think the price difference makes sense. We haven't gotten too much negative feedback about it, so.
I didn't even realize you guys had audio in there. I've read a number of them, and that totally went past me. So I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some of these.
Maybe we need better signage or something. Yeah, it's in the top right corner. You can listen to an audiobook, and it keeps your place, so the text will scroll as you're listening to it.
Well, that's the problem, though. It's like you want these things to be unobtrusive, but sometimes they're so unobtrusive that you can't see everything that's there. I mean, I think all good software has that problem. It's like, did you know if you right-click here that a whole new world opens up? So that's got to be a problem.
We do have that problem. One place in particular where we have that issue that we've been talking about recently is if you get a character, if you tap on the name of a character, you get the character, you can actually swipe through every character in the little box that pops up. But it's not, nobody knows that. So it's like this Easter egg that we put in there that whenever we show it to someone, it's one of our favorite things to show. But then if someone were to just open it up, they wouldn't necessarily know that you could even do that.
Right. So what would be I'm sort of curious about kind of like the production flow for a typical piece. So, for example, The Electric Mind, which is your most recent one, Ed Young reviewed it for Download the Universe and really liked it. And it was, it was an impressive piece, not least of which because you published it essentially the second that the paper that it involves about allowing a paralyzed person to control a robot limb. The moment that paper was published in Nature, you were publishing your thing. So what was that path to get to that point where, bam, you can publish it and get all this attention for it?
Well, this one was it was kind of a rare case for us. In a number of ways, it was a rare case for us, but in one in particular, which is that this piece actually started out somewhere else. It started out at another magazine, and I won't say the magazine, but they ended up not wanting the piece after assigning and then the reporter reporting because there had been this study called the Brain Gate study, and there had been a 60 Minutes piece about Brain Gate some years ago. And I guess some editor there, you know how these things happen, some editor there came across this 60 Minutes thing and said, wait, this has already been done. And the writers, sort of in vain tried to explain, well, no, actually they're about to make a huge announcement that's going to be big news, and you've had me out reporting this. I found this woman and everything else. And but they said no, they didn't want it. So, she talked to me about it and about what she had, and we thought, well, this is amazing. And I maybe because I've worked at Wired and places like I was familiar with this area of research and prosthetics and those sorts of things. I had written about them. So I just thought, this is incredible. This is going to be front page news everywhere. So let's do it. And then, so she set about writing it sort of for us, which is a little more character driven and not, the science is in there, but we wanted the character to be the sort of primary driver, the woman who had locked in. So she wrote it. We do a normal sort of magazine process where we do an edit back and forth, and in the middle of the edit, she found out that Nature paper was going live in May because they had been very cagey about it, as scientists are. They never want to say when it's going to come out. And they finally said, we have a date for it, and it's embargo, but it's May 17th or 16th. And so then we really had to hustle. I mean, we were doing rewrites. She was doing a rewrite on Saturday. I was editing on Sunday. She was doing a rewrite on Monday. And meanwhile, the producers set to work with the original draft, and they start looking at is there a timeline here? Like this one there was no point of putting map points in there. There was like 2 geographic points in the whole story. So, forget the maps. But there was video from Brown University. So are we going to edit that? How much are we going to use? All this sort of stuff. So they're working on that while we're doing the story back and forth. It goes to a fact checker after it's like a pretty stable draft. So the fact checker's off and running. And then it all kind of comes together. And the way we work is we close the main text first. So we proof it and everything so that the audiobook can be read. And then we do the extras and we proof those, and those close second. So in this case, it was even more hairy because Jess, the writer, was going to the Himalayas and was going to be completely out of touch. Actually, she still is. She's been out of touch since the thing
the writer
was released.
The writer has been is off in the Himalayas.
yeah. She was like,
oh boy,
climbing out in the Himalayas. So our last contact with her was like 3 days before we published it. So. Yeah, and then there's the sort of technical aspects of how we upload and things. So we have to upload to Amazon, 48 hours or so. They like it 48 hours before it's going to run. Apple, in our app, is a little easier it's harder and easier because we have to give them something 2 weeks before to get it approved. And so we put a rough into the app, and then they approve it, and then we can just hit the button to go the second it launches. So 1 p.m. and we were sort of doing the final proofs. We had an infographic that came in that morning, dropped it in, we proofed everything, and at 1 o'clock we hit go, and it was ready to go. And Amazon also had been alerted to the embargo, so at 1 p.m. they also turned it on, or however it is they do it.
Wow. So do you have like a production person whose job it is to keep all those balls up in the air? I mean, that seems like there's an awful lot to keep track of before you hit that publish button.
Yeah. We do. We went for the better part of a year where, with 3 days left, someone said, "Oh my God, has anyone written the display copy for Amazon?" And then somebody ran off and did it. So now we actually have a sort of schedule that it's kind of like a magazine schedule. This has to happen and this has to happen, and Olivia Koski is the person who keeps up with all of that and sort of can prod me and say, "Hey, we need another edit," we got to get that in, because if we don't, we don't have time to do the audiobook, which has to be edited. Like, we've sort of created all these steps for ourselves, which maybe is unwise, but we kind of have it under control now, I think.
I've noticed that a lot of places basically who are exploring this kind of format are basically trying to focus. So, some people may say like, okay, I'm just going to write Kindle singles, or I'm going to our company is going to make beautiful iPad apps, and that's it. You guys seem to be dealing with Amazon, with Kindles, with Apple, with an app version of the Atavist, and all these other places where you can get this stuff. Do things kind of translate pretty well across the, from one thing to the next, or are you just having one headache after another with trying to make sure that what works in one format is working in the other format?
Well, on the technical front, we don't have a problem, just because that's what we have, this whole software system that creates all the versions. So almost the whole idea of why we had that in the first place was so that, from a technical standpoint, we could create all the versions at the same time, and it would be, we have to refashion it for everyone. So, for instance, if the thing has video, it automatically pulls out the video and doesn't put it in the Kindle version. So that's not something, you don't have to recraft it for that. From an editorial perspective, it's more complicated, because when you are using a video and you do want to make it part of the narrative, the question is it going to replace a piece of text? So are you going to have a part of the story that is told through video that would otherwise be told through text, in which case, in the text-only version, you have to have a text chapter for that? Or is the video going to be something that is going to be in addition to the text that's already in there, in which case you can just kind of pull it out and put it in? Now, our ideal world is a piece of video, if we'll take video as example, but it works for interactive or anything else, where if you read the multimedia version, you would think, I couldn't imagine reading this story without this video. It really changes the experience. But if you read the text version, you wouldn't say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like, seems like there should be something else in here, a video or something. So we're trying to play both sides of the fence. Sometimes there's no way to do that. So in some cases, like we had this story, Baghdad Country Club, where we had an animation of one chapter. And in the text version, you actually read, it's not a transcript of the animation, it's actually a different account. It's the writer's version of what happened, and in the animation, it's actually the source's version of what happened. So we had a Radiolab producer go in and record this guy, and then we animated his sort of description of this adventure that he had.
Right, I see. And you mentioned this software, and it's actually you're actually releasing that for other people to use, correct?
Yes, we are. Hopefully, we're in the beta version right now. We have been for a bit, and so sometime this summer is kind of the safe thing.
So what's the plan? So will it be something that just anybody can get hold of, kind of like say people who blog, they can use WordPress? Would it be something like that?
Yeah, it would be. It's in that vein, like a WordPress or a Tumblr, where you go sign up and then you log on to the web. I think it's going to be like create.atavist.com. You log on and then you build your story. And so the kind of unit that we're operating in is actually not books. We're trying to sort of get away from whether they're books or not, but it's a story. You create a story, and then you can publish it to, I think in the short run, you'll publish it to something like, carl.atavist.com. And you'll also be able to publish it into a kind of like group app that we have where everyone's stories will be in there. And then, we'll be like a gallery of all those stories on our site. But and as we move forward, you'll be able to publish it to your own website as well. So you can use a custom URL. In the same way with something like Tumblr, you can actually put your Tumblr on your own site, or WordPress on your own site. You'll be able to do that as well. So, the idea just grew out of, we license this software to publishers, but we also hear from, literally like hundreds and then thousands of people who say, I want to do this, I want to do that. They're not things that go into the Atavist. They're not narrative nonfiction, but they're maybe educational or family history or all sorts of things. And this is a place that we're trying to create for those stories to be created. Now you can also create books with it, so you can spit out ebooks and upload them to Kindle and sell them if you want. And then the sort of final piece of it is that we'll also let you sell it from the site. So you can give it away for free, but you can also sell it. So it has this kind of, if you've seen Etsy, it sort of has this Etsy component to it where, if you do something creative and you think there's an audience out there that wants to pay for it, then you can kind of turn on the e-commerce and then you're selling what you've made.
So it's sort of interesting. I mean, it's a bit. I'm trying to think of the analogy here. So, I mean, as the Atavist, the publisher, you guys are kind of like, say, the New Yorker magazine. So it would be a bit like the New Yorker magazine saying, we're going to just, we're going to take in lots of people's stuff and sell it in a magazine store we've opened up, self-published magazines and our and also our own stuff. I mean, how do you kind of balance the identities of the Atavist as this publication that puts out this long form nonfiction versus the Atavist, which is is going to be kind of the Etsy of writing?
That's a really good question. I think that's one of the trickier things that we face in deciding to do this is how do you distinguish between those two? How much do we want to distinguish between those two? I mean, we kind of look at it like the thing called The Atavist is a magazine. It's sort of like a flagship magazine or e-singles publishing house that sort of shows what this tool can do. And then it's opened up for everyone else to do similar things with it. And I think in some cases, they'll probably do far more interesting things with it than we do. Like we've let J-School students use it, and they tend to do a lot more video, things that are video heavy instead of text heavy or photo heavy instead of text heavy. But I think, on our website, our pieces, the Atavist originals will sort of live alongside these other creations. And the question is like, how do we distinguish and what is the distinction between those two? And I think that's something we're going to have to feel out a little bit. It would be a lot easier if we had named the Atavist something else, and now Atavist was platform and the magazine was called, our special magazine. But as it happens, we have a lot attached to that name. So we're going to try to figure out how to sort of like navigate that probably narrow like branding canyon that no branding person would ever recommend we try to venture through. But I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, there is some advantage to saying, at least on the web, to saying, we're going to still sell on Kindle singles and through our own separate app, but saying like, hey, if you can create something more that's powerful and beautiful, and we'll put it like right alongside of ours. Like, we're not, well, we can talk about it more if it's interesting, but my views of sort of like self-publishing have evolved a lot because of this experience in some ways.
Yeah, I'm curious. What are your views about self-publishing?
Well, I think I've got my back up a little bit because I often I got to go on all these panels. Well, I guess I don't have to go on these panels, but I go on a lot of panels partly because I like for us to sell copies of our books, and maybe it helps. But you'll find people from the publishing industry, more from the book publishing industry, who will sort of ask me things like, "Well, how do you think you're going to maintain quality in what you do?" And to which my answer is, when's the last time you ever hired a fact checker for one of your books? I mean, we fact check everything. And not to be sort of, I don't think we're better than them. I think they have, I'm not saying we're superior to the book industry. It's just that there's this way that if you're a part of an industry, then you sort of associate everything that's small and outside of that, and at the extreme, self-publishing, as low quality. And I think they're actually, even if you look within the ranks of professional freelance journalists, there's a lot of sort of like latent stories and stories that don't get told and stories that don't get assigned that could be written by people who actually are extremely talented, reporters and writers. And I think if you look something like Kickstarter, or even, I mean, Etsy is a different type of thing, but it's just sort of like there's all these people out there with tremendous talent who they don't fit. They haven't scaled the ranks of publishing, and not all of them are great. And there's a lot of schlock, of course. There's a lot of bad writing. We're awash in bad writing as well. But I think there's possible for a small group of people and an individual person to create something of really high quality, and it actually doesn't need a building on Fifth Avenue in order for that to happen. And so I've kind of found it's weird because I probably in some ways come from the other direction where I believe in editing, for example. I think editing is crucially important.
I don't understand why people are addressing you as the representative of self-publishing. I mean, you have a workflow, you have rewrite, you have all this stuff. I mean, this is a far cry from a really straight self-published ebook on Kindle or something.
Yeah, well, I think I'm the guy nearby who's like the closest thing to to self-publishing, but also, I mean, I've had these experiences. I mean, if you look at David Dobbs did a story for us, which is our most successful story, and it's amazing. It's a really amazing story, and
this is My Mother's
part
Lover.
of what happened. My Mother's Lover, yeah, and part of what happened with that piece was that he had been working on his own for a very long time, and he had also sent it to friends who are editors, as you would probably do, circulate manuscripts to people. And by the time I got it, I'd love to take credit for having brilliantly edited that story, but by the time I got it, like, really good editors had already given him feedback on it, and it was already really, really great. I mean, I probably could have just published it. I may have just meddled with it just so I could feel like I played a role in it. But just to say, a person getting editing from a different source, it doesn't have to come in the traditional way. And so I just feel like in the same way that people who write us and say, I want to use your platform to tell the story of my grandfather who fought in the war, and I've got old home videos and I want to put it together somehow, that there's no reason for me to think that won't be something that will be very high quality and that they'll spend a lot of time and they'll, maybe they'll be a great writer and maybe they won't. But I've fallen a little bit more on the side of, let's unleash these people to do it instead of continually trying to protect. Because I think if all you're doing is trying to protect your industry, then you kind of forget that what actually wins out is quality. So you should just focus on making your stuff the best instead of like focusing on like how all this other stuff is shit. I don't know if that makes sense, but
so we at Download the Universe were a bunch of science junkies and various geeks, and in the nonfiction world, we sometimes look out and see huge amounts of coverage of politics or of entertainment or whatever, so it's interesting to look at the Atavist, which does have a mix of nonfiction topics, but there's a lot of science in there, from the electric mind, which we were just talking about, to Before the Swarm, about an entomologist, to you have just a whole bunch of science things in there. Now, do you think that just comes from your own background writing for Wired, and you've written for National Geographic and write about science technology, so that you guys are just receptive to that? Or do you think there's something kind of about science that lends itself to what you're trying to do?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. It's definitely the first one. I mean, that's the writing world that I come from, and obviously it's something it's an interest of mine. I mean, I studied science in college, and I've written about science a lot. And I think part of what makes it interesting for me is that it's a narrative challenge. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge to take something complex and both explain it, but also fit it into a narrative where someone will say, all right, I'm halfway through the story, but I can't stop reading because I got to find out what happens. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to do that when you're writing about a robbery or a murder or something that really has those events. So, if you find a science story that does that, I think it's really fun to try to tell it, because it can capture both of these. It can be more than just entertaining. It can actually have this information quotient, but also if you can really nail it, it could be something where people say, wow, I could not stop reading this story, and I think that's fun. It may be that it lends itself to the medium. I think we're so early in this idea of like these singles or whatever you want to call them, that it's yet to be seen sort of like what really works. But it makes sense in some way that if you typically have to take something that's difficult to explain and you have to smash it into a specific word count, that sometimes things might get lost. So if you're able to open up and try to tell it at whatever length makes sense to actually convey that this would be a medium that would work for that. Now, I always try to say, like, the downside of that is you got to know when to stop. I mean, like, we can do every piece up to like 30,000 words is our top limit, but not every piece wants to be 30,000 words either. And once you have unlimited space, it's difficult to find that point. But I do think, I mean, we've been happy with proud of the science pieces that we've done, and we try to pull the characters into. I think they're best when they're also human stories, to whatever extent possible that we can make them human stories.
I know, I'm just saying that way.
So, you were just in the New York Times on, I guess that was Monday, right? Yep.
Yep. Yeah, it was Monday.
David Carr was reporting on how you gotten some investment from some familiar names like Eric Schmidt from Google, and so it's clearly evidence that there's some people who are pretty big in the tech world are paying attention to what you're doing. Any thoughts on what is making them interested in this, this little company that is dedicated to nonfiction and not to, cats on the internet or whatever?
Hey, I am dedicated to cats on the internet as well.
Oh, cats are fine. I'm just saying that I'm sure that there's hundreds of millions of dollars invested in cats on the internet. Someone who's publishing stories on brain-machine interfaces or entomology, I think it was great to read about it, but it left me basically wanting to call you up and say, wow, what does this mean?
Well, I think the investment, and you see the investment on our part, really has to do with the technology more than the stories. I mean, the stories were how we came to the technology that we built, but their primary interest, I think, in most cases, I mean, I can't speak directly for the people invested in it, but I think is that we have a tool to do a certain type of storytelling, and we're trying to both make money by licensing that tool and be successful at that, but also we have this idea of opening it up and growing a sort of community of people who are using it to tell all sorts of stories, including probably companies, because you can use the thing to do a brochure if you want, or it's not really limited to doing something that's journalistic or that feels like a nonfiction or even a fiction story. So I think that's their primary interest, and our primary interest in getting investment was really to fund our technical development more, so we can make sure that the thing's robust, and we have to move at bigger servers. We've been doing that, and all these sorts of things that cost money to do. I think we did at certain points think about raising money just around the editorial portion of things, but the danger there to me is just that if you want to tell investors they're going to make a ton of money, not a ton of money, but they're going to make money on a purely editorial venture, then you really risk getting into situations where you need famous writers. You need writers who are really going to move copies. Whereas we would like to take that a little more slowly and say, all right, we're experimenting, we're trying these multimedia things. They don't always work out. We're growing our readership. We're doing it at the pace that we're comfortable with. Yeah. And the technology is going to be our growth thing, as opposed to saying, all right, now we got to sell X number of copies or else everybody's going to be unhappy. So, that's kind of like the direction that we decided to go with it.
Interesting. So in addition to, the bigger servers or what have you, I mean, now that you're getting this investment, I mean, what directions do you think you'll be be able to go in? I mean, any hints of what we can expect from the Atavist?
Well, it's mostly building out the things I described before. So it's being able to, right now someone can use our system to publish into an app, to publish these ebooks, but it's building up things that will make it really feel, every part of it to feel easy. And analytics for people. How many people have read your thing? That's a system that you have to build. We have that for ourselves, but to make it something that's viable for people to just log on and use it takes development, it takes people. So we need to hire someone whose job it is to handle that, and so that's kind of like where a lot of that's going to go. Sort of building out things. I mean, I think the platform is very. Obviously, you wouldn't take my word for it, but it's very easy to use, and you just sort of like log on and you go, and you're making chapters, and you're making a video, you're doing all these things. But we want all aspects of it to kind of feel seamless and professional, and that people will want to come back and use it. I mean, I think those things have to require developers, and developers cost money.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot. It's really interesting to hear from somebody what it's like to be actually building this new world. I mean, I think you guys are really doing some amazing things.
Well, thanks, and we love Demo Universe. We are huge fans. We've been waiting for something like that after lobbing our things into book reviewers over and over again, and getting. With the exception of like Carolyn Kellogg at the LA Times is really good. Like there's some people who really are into it, but then everywhere else the doors
who is the exception?
Carolyn Kellogg at the LA Times. She's like she's very kind of like in the future. But other places, if we can't send them like a paperback galley, they won't pick up the phone or send us an email. So.
Yeah, I wonder how long before people get over that that sense that it's not real if it's not on paper.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be soon. I mean, the way things are going with ebooks, it has to be soon. But